I'm very pleased that we're in the position to actually show some insight into what we are doing and the why and how we've decided on using eArk. Is it? Yeah, it's visible. Yeah, and we'll have a brief presentation. This is my colleague. He's the main digital preservation engineer at our department. I'm head of planning and development, so we're more on the technical side here. Nevertheless, there will be some, strategic and organizational aspects as well. You'll see a brief introduction on who we are, what we do, what digital preservation at OBVSG means, what's our context, why we've been choosing Libsafe, and then the second thing, why and how eArk, and then the marrying of eArk and existing METS-based workflows. I think it's, for us, this packaging is really fundamental to all this preservation workflows. You will see that, and I was almost surprised that it's almost 10 years that the initial eArk project was started, which is very nice and probably makes for a nice birthday next year. And then a general impression and outlook, and outlook and hopes. There will be some critical notes. I have to put that forward, because I think this is the place to discuss also critical things, and because I think it's also to work on maybe misunderstandings on our side, on the side of the designers of a specification. So who we are. I also used AI to generate these nice images. This is the library network. You probably can see Austria there. By something, it's all inspired by Francis Bacon, or what DALL-E makes of Francis Bacon. If you're interested in the prompt, it's in the text. I will just say 2 words to each of them. So who we are. We are a service center for a network of scientific, humanities, and administrative libraries in Austria. So it's a library focus. I think it's maybe in this community not so present that libraries also have aspects of archiving in them, or needs of archiving, some on organizational level, but for sure at technical level. And so we're a network of more than, or we provision services for a network of 90 institutions. So we are the service center for them. And it's still growing. Our member institutions range from large libraries, like the Austrian National Library, large university libraries, to really small libraries with just a couple of staff members. And our service tries to address all of them, because all have similar needs. And we do this right now mainly with our cataloging services, or the main central catalog, where they can use a shared catalog and leverage their work. We are governed by public law, so we are on the one hand a company, not for profit, but we are a company and we offer services. They are not obliged to use them, so our service really have to be convincing. They have to be inviting, and I think that does something to the service. It has been initially established for provision and coordinating of library automation. You find a link to this European law identifier. I think that's what it's called. You can read up there. It's a simple, small thing, and it says we are designed to provide these services, and we have a mandate to do that. Well, to digital preservation at OBVSG, this is what DALL-E fathoms that Francis Bacon might have thought digital preservation would look like in a group of engineers. It's not an oven. And so we have no in-house archiving requirements, because we are a service provider. We don't have the material to archive. So far, you never know in which area we might grow. Library institutions faced with long-term preservations are members of our network. So they do digitization of artifacts. They have metadata management. They do management of born digital material, and some of them also have the legal obligation to keep this born digital material and to preserve this born digital material. So the law that our company is founded on was extended in 2020 with additional provisions for central core infrastructure for digital preservation. So we now have actually we shall do it in scientific and artistic publishing. You can also read up on that. It's just a brief law, but it's interesting to put something like that in a law. So it's for us just the right time to start. No, it's not the right time to start. We started a few years ago, but it's the right time to start developing and offering the actual digital preservation services to our community and customers. It's a very equal relation we have. That's also interesting in our case. So what we aim for? We aim for many things you have also seen with the e-archiving, e-ARK initiative as well. We try to have an aggregation of competencies. I've told you before, there are really big entities in our network and very small ones. So you have entities that have development centers and software development themselves and provisioning of data services, and you just have people who are in a position to do the actual work on site, but not so much the technical implementation, and also not the time to delve into the details of technical specifications. So they need help there. Yeah. We want a streamlined digital preservation workflow that allows, a generalized model. Who doesn't want that? But not as general as OAIS is. We want to be more concrete, and we want to have something that is more tied down. And so in the aftermath of a disaster or the future, or maybe it's both the same, then could reuse that. So packaging and package information is super important here. And the right range of types of archived objects. They all do different things, but they all have the need to archive them. So we want to become the go-to address for this community in Austria. It's not all digital archiving, it's this sector we are addressing. So choosing Libsafe, that's what Valley does out of the Libsafe logo. You probably recognize the box and the lock. And it's shining brightly in the background. That's its interpretation. And we're trying to choose a digital preservation system. And it was a long process. It was a public tender process on European level, and we founded a consortium with the Austrian National Library, who at that point had the urgent need to find a new solution because their old system went end of life, and they needed something new. And we tried to join forces and expertise in the institutions to make this tender and make a really good and tight description of what we actually need. So they have a long track record in digital preservation, do this for a long time. And OBVSG has some staff previously engaged in preservation activities, so that was a nice fit to throw together these competencies. The tender process is also linked there, or the message that was published at the end. And we posted basically criteria to find a viable solution. I don't want to go into deep detail with the wish list we had there, but we wanted to tie it down to actual long-term preservation experts. We wanted a provider who is really in the field, not a general software house, not somebody who I don't name and blame anybody, but not one of the big super tankers who just want a contract, and that's it. They also might have good solutions, but that was not what we wanted. We wanted more interaction and we wanted more discussion, and so we wanted an expert, and we tried to reflect this in the tender process. So the solution shall or should does allow the use of established standard, but we also addressed the point that it needed to be open to adapt currently evolving or new standards. So there had to be some flexibility in the packaging format in the system. And we needed flexible interaction with third-party systems because we're also a software integrator, and we know that our customers have different discovery systems, different repositories for end-user access, and we needed to integrate that all with this system. And yeah, of course, it should be scalable and capable of managing multiple tenants in our case, because each institution is a separate entity and they need a separate system, and it shall be separate, at least from a logical, but also maybe for a physical basis. Yeah, and a clear exit path. There, again, packages come in again. And the end result was, I don't want to bother you with the full process, but the end product was that we got accepted an offer of Libsafe Advanced Pro on-premise. I think that's the proper name of it. I had to look that up before and got it wrong the first, but this is an on-site product that's important. We have it, we have full control of the system, and we are also in the position to add tooling on our own to the processing steps, and that's puts us in the position to work with our choice of standard. So why and how eArch? Now we're getting into the eArch domain. Maybe some of you recognize what Dali made of the eArch logo here, the cloud and the boat. I like it very much. So if you want a new logo, that's maybe for the next funding period. We'll talk about funding also a bit in the end. So we're searching for a non-proprietary and non-system specific package format. That's something open, something standardized, something where we felt there's a body of people behind that and institutions who really have a foundation. And we've seen something on that this morning, and that made me even more confident that we're on the right track with that. And we needed something that has implementations. Maybe there's some room for improvement for implementation, but hey, here we are. We also do some implementations in some areas, and I think the main thing is a strong specification with some clarity and specificity, where you can actually do something with not OAIS, that's super, but it really does not tell me how the packages should look like. So we're searching for a specification that promises some longevity in the end. Yeah, and then we had the first tenant. We went live with the Austrian National Library. They are self-managed. They all do their own decisions, and they have a migration from the previous system to the new system. But now we're the first time in the role of a service provider who actually has to do it for our tenant. It's a dangerous trap in a way, because you need to abstract the tenant's requirements in a way that it is generic enough to also serve other tenants, so that you don't have the need to do every tooling differently for every tenant, because that would be far beyond our capacity. So you also need to have some slight abstraction for the tenant-specific third-party system integration, but that is even more difficult. But I think it's far more important to have the first part, the SAP part and the AAP part similar. So we wanted to put the package specification up front, and to the help went our research, and we found eArch. And many things depend and many decisions depend on the package formats. the routes from original systems to digital preservation, for example, or the tools you can need or the tools you have to build. And I think this is the point where I hand over to our engineer, Bernhard. Stage is yours.
Yeah. So, as you said, I'm basically the sole engineer for this particular area of work, or as I like to think of myself, as a digital preservation universal dilettante who has to have his fingers in pretty much every corner. So under that light, please, I apologize in advance if there are any details in the specifications I might have misunderstood or wrongly look critically on. Maybe it's just because I have to switch contexts all the time. So that may also be an interesting aspect, just to how does the specification reach people who are have divided attention but want to get the most out of it and have a certain standard of clarity inside. So one of the primary things that we wanted to get from packages was reusability and clarity, in not only as a generic wrapper around data, like Baggett generally is, which at least in my initial research was the most common way to package SRPs for other systems. But it really mainly looked like it's just a bag of data and a bit of metadata around it, but the actual decisions on how the data is structured inside or what metadata fields are added on top are all very specific to the institution or consortiums. So that was one of the things that immediately stood out as a very positive aspect of the e-ARK specifications to me. But it also talked a lot about the inner structure and relationships between representations of objects. So ideally, we would have just used e-ARK as a whole without anything else on top. But we also landed on the decision ultimately to still use Baggett around it as a way to have the possibility to split up packages that we might ingest that are too big and would benefit from being split up. This is something that I found easy to understand in the Baggett specification, where the grouping mechanism was clear enough for me to also implement and make work. And I didn't find the proper specification part that might fulfill the same need in e-ARK. So I noticed later that there is talk about the divided package structure in the AIP specification, which I noticed a bit late because I maybe naively assumed it to be in this common specification at first, so I overlooked it for the longest time. So that still remains an open work item if there is a way to maybe get away from Baggett in the future again and just use e-ARK everywhere. So at the bottom you can see the basic workflow that happens on ingest in Libsafe Advanced Pro. So generally, Libsafe is structured into different nodes to enable a microservices workflow to scale the system up. And each node service is responsible for a certain step of processing your SIPs until they become AIPs and land in preservation storage at the end. So the main part that's relevant to us here is the preprocessor stage, where all the processes can happen that might potentially change the content that we want to ingest at the end, but also where we do all the validation. So we are currently doing the standard virus scanning there, also the validation of the bag structure and of the e-ARK structure. So that's going to be the most interesting and most important point that I will get to. What you can also see, the Explorer service is what is being executed next inside Libsafe, where metadata extraction is happening. And that is one point that we saw pretty early on that we had benefits from using e-ARK for. So inside each of these services, Libsafe allows us to integrate our own tools. So it's not a generic plug-in mechanism, but it basically calls out to executables that we can write. And this is the way that we are hooking into either a shallow wrapper that calls other packages like Commons IP for the validation, or just implementing our own logic for handling or maybe fixing up structures that don't fit from the start. And as I was saying about the metadata, that made some things quite easy. That one of the central recommendations is to keep the metadata separate as files not inside the mets, but as a physically separate folder, which basically means you have a really nice way to just refer to a particular file that we can then use without having any XML or met parsing logic before that, and use it as extended metadata, which in Libsafe parlance basically is just a separate mechanism of storing metadata for objects that's not structured, but enables the referencing for the free text search. One aspect that also comes into play, because in our context, since we are reusing a commercial platform, we don't have control over everything. We can just use write tools that are being called. So there are decisions that the platform makes that we have to work with or work around. So one consequence of that is that all our AIPs at the end will be logical AIPs, which I'm not entirely happy with, but that's the reality we work in. So when it comes to scenarios of metadata updates, that's also something that we found to be a good way to prevent duplication of storage needs, because there is no way to version, to differentially version whole objects. So having a way to just target the metadata itself for updating separately from the actual data was a nice property. I also mentioned shortly that one of the other recommendations that eArch makes about putting XML schemas in each file was something that we actually decided against in our local implementation decision, which doesn't make it invalid because it's just a recommendation. It's just something that we didn't really want to do for reasons of storage need for one, and because we didn't really see a strong reasoning behind it that would really override the increased storage need for us. So as I was saying, since it only calls packages outside, and Libsafe wants to be somewhat generic and reusable, that means in fact that it doesn't tell us anything about what package we have to use. So it's packaging agnostic. You can work with any packaging format that you want. And since we did all that, that means there will be a lot of power in our hands to take over responsibility in how we implement eArch, hopefully to the best of our ability and understanding, but also some concepts that we will not be able to represent in the actual interface and the management processes that come after. Practically, this means centrally that Libsafe on-premise is not aware of the concept of representations. So we are having and ingesting a lot of packages that are storing different representations, but Libsafe really only knows about the top level of the whole intellectual entity, the object. So that would be one thing that we would wish for Libsafe to eventually enable us to also map to something manageable. So besides the system side, there is also the interesting part about how did we integrate our first tenant. So our first tenant is the University of Economics in Vienna, and they are managing pretty much all of their objects that they want to give us inside Gobi. Gobi is heavily Metz-based in its workflows, as well as eArch is being very focused on specifying its concepts inside the Metz serialization. And I know that it's not strictly speaking the main end goal to talk about only the physical representation, but in reality we have to work with that. So that was one point of friction that we had in this year's work, basically. So our main question was, will it blend? Or properly spoken, does it validate given the pre-existing met structures that we got? So as a bit of context, thankfully the University of Economics had enough resources to actually get the eArch export functionality inside Gobi developed. And this happened not as a clean room implementation, as a completely building up of new structures, but it was made as, okay, we already have complex mets with logical struct maps and a lot of additional fields that are not being concretely talked about inside eArch, and then make an eArch out of that. So that means there were a lot of structures inside that should be valid, but put up a lot of issues in practice when using validation tools that already existed.
And they make that open source. That's they promised. We need to hurry up a bit.
Okay, I'll try. Quite in short, after a bit of investigation, it turned out that the most commonly developed solution to validate was Commons IP, as you also could see beforehand on the eArch software GitHub repository, which was one of the main avenues that we tried to give feedback to. Okay, this doesn't validate, there is an issue, which over the course of the year, I think netted quite a few improvements to the implementation in practice. So there were a lot of bug fixes there, but there are still some remaining that we are hoping to get. Okay, so we're hoping to get them fixed eventually. Currently, we have to implement a few local workarounds that result in the packages actually validating as to our interpretation of the specification. But at least I am confident that my workarounds make sense and are conformant. So hopefully this will mean it validates elsewhere in the future as well. Not all of it was implementation based. The issues weren't all implementation based. Some were also things that the specification doesn't make clear enough. One that we had quite early was that the object IDs that are being written in the mets are DOIs, so little object identifiers, which contain slashes, which brought up one issue that given the requirement that the folder should be called the same as the object ID, and slashes in DOIs are not representable in most file systems, or at least not in Windows-based ones. There was guidance missing on what the sanctioned mechanism is to have this actually validate. So this is one of the points that we have to work around locally at the moment. There is also something else that came up about how does a validator even know what version of eArch to validate. I understand this is currently an ongoing open discussion that has been brought up at the board meetings, I think. Another is that the MIME type MIME type requirements were overly strict because they only talked about the IINA list as being the valid values for MIME types, which didn't match the kind of data that we actually got. So there were MIME types inside, like application X 9660 ISO and so on. So I brought up an issue on GitHub for that to discuss steps. So the last I heard was, I think it will be rectified in the future, but it's currently not yet updated officially. And another one was, I think, a common theme that we also saw is that wording is hard. As I also know from programming, naming is one of the hardest things, and language generally, of course. So there were a few things about the validity of identifiers that were formulated in a way that led to a validation implementation that was overly strict over MET's document, even though it was supposed to be a MET's basic XML ID inside one MET's document. So our general impressions and outlook, for lack of time, I will not talk about our great images, is that there's a lot of overall complexity to get through and really get a grip on as a sole developer or a small team of people with limited time to really delve into the whole set of specifications. So our main impression is that there is still room for improvement to improve the consistency of navigability, to really know what fits where. One thing that I also think is in discussion is that so far the archival information and premise specifications were formulated as CITS, as information types, which didn't make sense to us. And I'm glad to hear that it seems to also not make all that much sense to you, and you will be renaming it, I think. Right. The other point was that, dips are being only specified for one representation, which we are currently practically ignoring by exporting multiple of them. Right. And one general question that, since Commons IP was basically the one implementation found that actually was workable, is an open question. How do we practically validate that what we are generating and validating is something that will also be actually interoperable and reusable if you want to get your packages out into another system that ideally has an independent implementation of the specifications as well?
Yeah, we have some hopes, but just one final word. Thank you for all the work that has been put into that. We really want to open a plea for further continuing this. If the EC is watching EU 23, put some money in this area. This is super important. This is one of the ways to keep cultural heritage and the requirement to keep things and document it really alive and for the long term. So thank you for this work.